Chapter 4. He saw them too. Now they were no longer surrounding the two of them, but were rushing past from the direction of the Gia in two parallel streams, or perhaps dividing into two streams just beyond the point of visibility. He and Pat were moving down an alley walled by a continuous double line of rushing shadows. They huddled closer to each other and bored on through the fog. They were no more than 150 feet from the rocket now, and then, with a suddenness that brought them to a sharp halt, something more solid than fog shapes, loomed darkly straight before them. It, whatever it was approaching. It was visible now as a dark circle at the level of the ground, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, upright and broadside on. It was moving as fast as a man walks, and it materialized rapidly into a distinct solidity. Ham and Pat stared fascinated. The thing was featureless, just a dull black circle and a tubular body that stretched off into the fog. Or, not quite featureless, now they could perceive an organ that projected from the center of the circle, a loose, quivering member like a large pancake on a finger-like stem, whose edges quivered and cupped toward them as if to catch sounds or scent. The creature was blind. Yet it possessed some sense that could register distant objects. 30 feet from them, the stalked disc cupped deeply in their direction, the creature swerved slightly and rushed silently toward the pair. Ham was ready. His automatic roared its muffled blast and roared again. The attacker seemed to telescope in upon itself and rolled aside, and behind it appeared a creature identical in all respects, the same featureless black circle, the same quivering disc. But a high, piercing whine of pain slipped like a sharp knife through the fog. This was a danger Patricia could understand. There was no fear about her now. She had faced too many outlandish creatures on the hotlands frontiers of Venus, or in the mysterious wilds of the mountains of eternity. She snatched her companion's flame pistol from its holster and stood with the weapon ready to vomit its single blast of destruction. She knew that it represented a last resort, not to be used until other means had failed, so she simply held it and tugged on the wire to the Gia. 3 pulls, and then again 3, would summon aid from Cullen and Harbord. The second creature, or was it another segment of the same animal, came charging forward. Ham sent 2 more bullets into the blank, faceless front of it, and again that keening note of pain sounded. The monster swerved and collapsed, and another black circle was rushing toward them. His shot failed to drop this one, but the creature veered. Suddenly, the thing was roaring past them, black and huge as a railroad train. It was a segmented being. It was composed of dozens of 8-foot links, like a train of miniature cars, 3 pairs of legs to a section. But it ran like a single creature, with ripples of motion flowing back along its countless legs in exactly the way a centipede runs. Ham had a flashing glimpse of the manner in which the segments were joined by finger-thick ropes of flesh. He sent 3 bullets into the middle of a passing section. It was a bad mistake. The segment spouted black liquid and rolled out of line, but the one behind it suddenly turned its stalked member toward the 2 defenders and came rushing at them. And off in the fog, the first section was circling back. They had 2 to face now instead of 1. Ham had 3 cartridges left in the clip. He grimly fired 1 shot, full at the quivering disc of flesh that cupped toward him, saw the monster collapse, and sent another bullet into the segment that followed. The thing, or things, seemed to extend indefinitely into the fog. Beside him, he heard the roar of the flame pistol. Pat had waited until the other monster was nearly upon her, so that her single blast might do as much damage as possible. Ham stole time for a momentary glance at the result. The terrific discharge had simply incinerated a dozen segments, and 1 solitary survivor was crawling away into the fog. "Good girl," he muttered, and sent his last bullet into the onrushing monstrosity. It dropped, and behind it driving inexorably on, came the follower. He flung his empty weapon at the fleshy disc, saw it pound off the black skin, and waited, thrusting Pat behind him. There was a great roaring light, a flame pistol. Dim in the fog were the figures of Harbord and Cullen, tracing their way along the wire, and before him were writhing segments of the blasted monster. What remained of the creature had had enough punishment, apparently, for it veered to the left and went thundering away into the mist, now no more than 10 segments long. And all around the group, just beyond visibility, the fog shapes gestured and grimaced and gibbered, and then they too vanished. Not a word was spoken as the four traced the wire to the door of the Gia. Once within, Patricia let out a low whistle of relief as she pulled off her dripping jacket. "Well," she breathed, "that was a thrill." "A thrill?" snorted Ham. "Say, you can have this whole soggy planet for all of me, and I've a mind to limit you to the ship, too. This is no place for a thoughtless imp like you. You draw trouble the way honey draws flies." "As if I had anything to do with it," she retorted. "All right, order me to stay aboard if you think it'll do any good." He grunted and turned to Harbord. "Thanks," he said. "That was close until you two showed up. And, by the way, what was the warning for? The fog shapes?" "Do you mean that Mardi Gras parade that's been going by?" asked Harbord. "Or was it a spiritualist convention? No, we weren't sure they were real. It was for the thing you did get tangled up with. It came humping by here in your direction." "It, or they," corrected Ham. "Did you see more'n one of them?" "I made it more than one of them. I cut it in half, and both halves went for us. Pat took care of one with the flame pistol, but all my bullet seemed to do was to knock off pieces." He frowned. "Do you understand the thing, Pat?" "Better than you do," she retorted sharply. His threat to restrain her to the ship still rankled. "This would be a fine expedition without a biologist, wouldn't it?" "That's the reason I'm being careful about you." He grinned. "I'm afraid I would be without a biologist. But what's your idea concerning that series of detachable worms out there?" "Just that. It's a multiple animal. Did you ever hear of Henri Fabre?" "Not that I remember." "Well, he was a great French naturalist of about 2 centuries ago. Among other things, he studied some interesting little insects called processionary caterpillars who spin themselves a cozy nest of silk and march out of it every night to feed." "Well?" "Just listen a moment," said the girl. "They march out single file, every caterpillar touching its head to the tail of the one preceding it. They're blind, you see, so each one trusts the one ahead. The first one's the leader. He picks the root, leads them to the proper tree, and there the column breaks up for feeding. And at sunrise they form again into little columns, which join again into the big procession, and back they go to their nest." "I still don't see." "You will. Now, whichever caterpillar is in front is the leader. If you take a stick and break the column at any point, the one behind the gap becomes the leader for his followers, and leads them back to the cobweb nest just as efficiently as the original leader. And if you segregate any one caterpillar, he finds his own way, being leader and column in one." "I begin to see," muttered Ham. "Yes. That thing, or those things, are something like the processionary caterpillars. They're blind. In fact, eyes would have much less value on Uranus than on the Earth, and perhaps no Uranian creatures developed eyes, unless the fog shapes possess them, but I think these creatures are a long way ahead of processionaries, because the caterpillars establish their contact along a thread of silk, but these fellows, apparently, do it through actual nerve ganglia." "Eh?" cried Ham. "Of course. Didn't you notice how they were joined? That flat organ in front, each one had it slapped like a sucking disc against the one before him, was always placed in identically the same position. And when you shot one out of the middle of the file, I saw the pulpy lump it had covered on the one it followed. And besides—" She paused. Besides what? Well, didn't it strike you as strange that the whole line cooperated so well? Their legs moved in a sort of rhythm, like the legs of a single creature, like the legs of a myriapod, a centipede. I don't think habit or training or discipline could ever account for the way that file of creatures acted, rushing and stopping and veering and circling, all in perfect unison. The whole line must have been under the direct neural control of the leader, hearing and smelling what he heard and smelled, even perhaps responding to his desires, hating with him, and finally fearing with him.
"Damned if I don't think you're right," exclaimed Ham. "The whole bunch of them acted like one animal."
"Until you carelessly created two by breaking the line," corrected the girl. "You see—"
"I made another leader," finished Ham excitedly. "The one behind the break in the file became a second leader, able to act independently." He frowned. "Say, do you suppose those things accumulate their intelligence when they join? Does each one add his reasoning power, if any, to the dominating brain of the leader?"
"I doubt it," said the girl. "If that were true, they would be able to build up a colossal intellect just by adding more sections. No matter how stupid each individual might be, they'd only have to click together enough of them to create a godlike intelligence. If anything like that existed here, or ever had existed, they wouldn't be rushing around weaponless and savage. There'd be some sort of civilization, wouldn't there? But," she added, "they might pool their experience. The leader might have all the individual memories at his disposal, which wouldn't add a darn thing to his reasoning powers."
"Sounds plausible," agreed Ham. "Now, as to the fog shapes, have you figured out anything about them?" She shuddered.
"Not much," she confessed. "I think there's a relationship between them and these others, though."
"Why?"
"Because they came streaming by us just before the attack. They might simply have been running away from the multiple creature, but in that case they ought to have scattered. They didn't. They came rushing by in two distinct streams, and not only that, but all during the fight they were flickering and shimmering in the background. Didn't you notice that?"
"My attention was occupied," replied Ham dryly. "But what about it?"
"Well, did you ever hear of the indicator albarostris, the honey guide?"
"It sounds vaguely familiar."
"It's an African bird of the cuckoo family, and it guides human beings to the wild bee colonies. Then the man gets the honey and the bird gets the grubs."
She paused.
"I think," she concluded, "that the fog shapes played honey guide to the others. I think they led the creatures to us, either because your shot angered them, or because they wanted the leavings after the others were through with us, or because they're just plain destructive. Anyway, that's my guess."
"If they're real," added Ham, "we'll have to turn the infrared camera on the next group or herd or swarm or flock, or whatever you call their gatherings. I still think they're mostly illusory." She shuddered.
"I hope you're right," she murmured.
"Bah!" said Harbert suddenly. "Women don't belong in places like this. Too timid."
"Yeah," retorted Ham, now fully prepared to defend Patricia. "She was cool enough to notice details during that fracas out there."
"But afraid of shadows," grumbled Harbert.